want to welcome you to the Distorted Dialogue podcast on the Metal Institute of Thrashology. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Joe, because I don't want to butcher your last name.
My name is Joe Turmes.
Termis, I was going to go with that,
Turmes,
but
yep.
I think I
Yep.
would have been wrong.
I hear thermos a lot or termes, so it's all good.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
used to
hey,
it.
Joe's from the killer band Chaosmonaut, which I listened to. I think they got like five songs out, maybe six.
Yeah, I mean, if you keep it in mind that a song is an album for us,
Yeah, I
so
was going to get
yeah.
there with that. It took me, I was like, at first, I was like, this is only six songs. It'll be a real quick listen while I'm cutting grass. Next thing you know, they were all a half hour, but I was already familiar with your last couple ones.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. Yeah,
I,
what'd you think? I'm curious your thoughts on our catalog.
on the last, this one's my favorite. I'm not good
Passion
with memory. I was
aggression.
in a car accident, but passion aggressive, maybe
Passion aggression.
aggression. That's it.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's maybe the coolest song I ever heard because it checks every box off for me. And being, I think it was like 34 or 36 minutes in length.
Yeah.
And
hmm
it felt like all of 4 minutes because like it just flowed so well that I'm an old school listener of metal, so I prefer albums over songs. And like the way that music's rolled out today as far as like singles just being released and even as far as like the singles being broken up and like released prior to everything else kind of taints my listening experience. So for your album is almost or your song which is the length of an album, it's almost like an album just with removing every break between the songs.
Yeah. And it's interesting because people say, "Oh, you should split this up into separate songs to make it more marketable." But you listen to those separate sections separately; they don't really stand alone as songs anyway. And so, it kind of makes it really hard to market our music because if we were to do that, it would be like, "Well, this isn't really a complete song. What is this?" So yeah, it really just kind of it was designed as a full album, and it really only works that way, in my opinion.
I would have to agree with you. Like I said, I complain, like I interview a lot of bands and especially some of the older ones from the 80s.
Yeah.
They still write in album form, not in songs. Whereas a lot of
hmm
the newer artists seem to just specifically write songs. And I get frustrated because like you pick up these new singles and while they may be great, sometimes they're way more impactful with what's bookending that as it like
Yeah.
the transitions from light to heavy or light to dark, whatever. Just sometimes the pieces around it make for a much more informative experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I almost like it's real hard not to get excited when a band releases a single to announce the new album coming out, but I almost will never listen to that single. I'll just wait till the album comes out and listen to it all together. Um, Partly because like some songs that, especially get released ahead of time, they just don't really make sense outside the context of the album. And so when we write, it's yeah, everything is in the context of that album, and it just feels weird to like take a piece out of it and display it out of place without that context.
I also like that you guys don't overload your music with lyrics either. It seems like you guys
Yeah.
almost give like little tastes of an idea, and then you allow the listener to almost marinate on it and form like their own opinions, or maybe like where the journey would take the listener just based off of the music. Like that way, like it doesn't influence listeners like politically or whatever. I just think that's a really great. I think it's a really great way to approach an album.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it's funny because our vocalist really is not into metal at all. And so we really love having her on the album and doing her thing. She's got a fantastic style, but most of the writing is done with the three of us guys, and we very much take it from a very instrumental um, standpoint. And then, then on the other hand, that allows us to really feature her vocals for very specific sections to have, very gives it a lot of dynamic feel because you just don't really expect them when they come in, and it can really change the mood of the album.
Oh yeah. And I think too, I think if you have too many lyrics and too much of her voice, maybe it would water down the impactfulness of,
Yeah.
the lyrics as well. Now, does when she sings, do you guys all pitch in on lyric writing or does she write her own?
We all pitch in, and on Passion Aggression, we actually all sing, and then we had Brandon Walker do guest vocals, Brandon Walker of Gorot, and so for the vocals that he did on the last half, he wrote the lyrics for it. But a lot of times we'll collaborate together, but we very much like to hand an idea or a feeling and say, this is where we're going with this. What can you do with it? And then, Rebecca will write something and we'll bring it back and the band will marinate on it for a bit. But, we're pretty easygoing in that regard.
I to go back to it for listeners who are like, or viewers who are like, a 30-minute song, what's it like? But it really does go through like there's moments of like stoner rock and doom. There's moments of more like a heavier Black Sabbath style stuff. It literally checks off almost every subgenre for me. So when you're sort of like, oh man, this is getting too much into the progressive side, and you're like, because I'm not a progressive. Like I don't
Mhm.
really like Jefferson Starship, Chicago, those kind of bands. So like when it starts going in that path, I was like, oh, where's this going? And then like it just shifts immediately. But it's not like a hard shift. It's like a continual flow. And I imagine it's awfully difficult for you guys to write 35 minutes that flows so seamlessly.
Yeah, it's funny. It's kind of almost easier for me to write that way than it is to write a normal song. And one of the reasons why we pull in so many genres is all four of us have very distinct influences. Like me, I'm the doom guy.
Okay.
My trinity is Yob, Bong Ripper, and Earth with a little King Crimson flavoring in there. But then, our drummer Jake, he's into, the death and black metal. He's, real big into Gojira. And then my son Joey, who's drummer and lead guitar player, he's real into power metal and thrash metal. So he brings in, kind of like in Passion Aggression, we end with that guitar solo that, kind of ends it on a real high note.
Yeah.
It's that's his influence coming into it. So, and then Rebecca, she brings in jazz, classical, opera, and so we're it's real fun to just throw all these ingredients in the stew and make sure we got something that make fits everybody's personality.
That specific solo outro, or I don't know if it's an outro, but like that solo at the end of Passion Aggression with the brightness on the lead, man, that's just such a great way to end the album because immediately after listening to 36 minutes, I was like, oh man, I need more of this. Let's go back.
I
So
love that. We you know one's or actually Rebecca's dad saw us play that live and it's like, wow, that sounds like Yes. And it's like, that's awesome. I love that, we pull in that comparison and like at the end of this heavy epic thing that we just pounded people's heads with.
I got an Electric Wizard vibe from your stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean I love Electric Wizards, so
Thick, thick rhythms, man. And I loved
yeah.
it. Like just thick, thick tones. Great guitar tones from both of you guys.
Thank you. It's interesting. Today, I was posting some videos of tracking, bass for our new album. And if you don't know, we don't have a bass player. All the bass comes from my guitar. And, it's kind of getting heat that like, well, why don't you just get a bass player? And well, I get all that tone just from this Les Paul. So why do I need a bass player? Why would I want one?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, but Electric Wizard is, I freaking love Electric Wizard.
Oh yeah. I was just joking around with a band, I think Cryptodira, and I was telling them that like bassists aren't even like real parts of bands. They're like sort of like an add-on band member, you know? Like you don't really need a bassist, do you?
Well, we have this joke that we have a rule that bass players are not allowed. And the reason why that is every time I start a band, I end up getting stuck being the bass player. So I started a band where that was never going to be allowed to happen ever again. I was going to do the bass through the guitar, and then that way I couldn't get shoved in that little pigeonhole.
Well, I tell you what, so you did the bass on then Passion Aggression too, right?
Yeah, so that bass and guitar is tracked simultaneously through the same guitar.
Interesting. I thought, because it said, like, when I was researching, it says, like, Joe, guitar, bass, vocals. And I was like, wow, I just figured you played a bass on it as well.
Nope, that's I've modified this Les Paul to it's got a 80 gauge flat wound on the sixth string. I did this experiment back when the band was beginning. I had this really old piece of crap guitar. It was a Fender Starcaster. Actually, I think I got it right here. This guy, and I don't kind of see what but this middle pickup, I pulled all the magnets out except for on the sixth string there because I wanted to see if I could kind of have that be the bass player. And so I did, and it worked. I ran that through its own output on a TRS jack, and that was like the beta test. So once I proved that out, I had Alex Avedissian build me a custom pickup for the Les Paul that does the same thing, and it's under the neck humbucker. There's actually a P bass under there that's wired to its own output. It's only got the magnet under the sixth string with an 80 gauge flat wound tune to drop A. And that string runs through its own set of effects on my pedal board and then into stereo bass amps. So that one string is got a lot of power behind it. And then it also runs through the other pickup with, that gets all six strings. And so, that goes into a third bass amp, which does the guitar stuff. But yeah, all the bass work and the guitar stuff is tracked right at the same time.
That's crazy, man. I've never heard
Yeah.
anything like that before.
There's a couple bands that do similar stuff. I was looking into how Telekinetic Yeti was doing their thing, and they have like a seven string that has a whammy. But I didn't really like the whammy sound. Eagle Twin does something similar as well, and Local H also, they basically have a bass pickup that's slanted sideways, so it picks up like the bottom half of their strings. But I really hate the sound of treble in my bass. I want it just as bassy as possible. So yeah, so I kind of was inspired by their methods and did my own thing. I played with octavers for a while and never really liked them. So, really it's just cut out as much treble as possible and boost those bass frequencies as much as possible and run them through huge amps with lots of power.
I tell you what, it sounds great. Don't change a damn thing.
Thank you.
Keep that going. I'm
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
new.
we really like it. Yeah.
I'm pretty new to guitar. Like I've only been playing like 2 years, so I suck really bad. But it's all about the experience for me. I have a blast.
Yeah.
So like I'm learning about like chasing signals and like messing with effects. So I'm thinking I might have to like start taking magnets out of stuff and seeing what happens.
I'm more than happy to help. I love dissecting all this stuff. Um, yeah, and part of the motivation there too was, we do a lot of improv work, especially early in the band's career, but if you're not really practiced with a lot of improv and you're trying to do it with a bass player, it can sound really bad. And so, this was allowed me to do the improv thing, but I would always be in tune and in time with myself at the very least. And so that helped us, have that flexibility to kind of play these live shows where nothing was really that planned and still make it, something sound like something I would like to listen to.
Yeah. And like you said, I guess the talking between the guitar and the bass is really easy since it's the same person, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
They're
Well,
taking,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
no, you go. You know way more.
Yeah, because I'm hitting that bass string at the same time I'm hitting the guitar chords, and my fingers on the same place. So yeah, it's and then then it evolved where I had control to where I can loop bass and guitar separately. I can control volume. I have two volume pedals on my board, one for the bass, one for the guitar, so I can then basically have my own foot controlled volume mix on stage. I built well, not built, I took two EHX freeze pedals and combined them into a single enclosure and then wired them up so that I could freeze guitar and bass either separately or together. So I could hold a guitar chord and play a bass line underneath or hold a bass tone and
Yeah.
solo over it. So, uh, that kind of limitation, like enforced limitation on our band structure kind of opens me up to being creative in completely different ways.
But but that has to be awesome because that's like a complete second arsenal of weapons
Oh
that at
yeah.
your disposal.
Yeah, and especially like in a live setting where, I can change on the fly and I don't really have to communicate with anybody else that, I'm going to change this riff or that thing and, just like have that control in this crazy live setting is really powerful. And especially since we have, two drummers and letting them do their thing and I'm trying to compete with them and yeah, we have a lot of different weapons than a lot of bands, I feel like.
Right. But that gives you the uniqueness so you don't just
Yeah,
like you're not just thrown in the pack. Um
exactly.
I first one of the first bands I saw that ever did anything really different for me was Stinking Lizavada, if you know them.
I don't know them.
We have this and we have this wonderful wonderful young lady in Pittsburgh named Shy, and
Mhm.
she's like the mother of like doom and stoner rock for me. She introduced me to all this stuff, and she has this little festival we throw in Pittsburgh where like bands from around the regions come into town. It's a Friday and Saturday, and it's just man, it was just so fun. And I saw this band from Philadelphia. I think it's a three piece. They have a stand-up bass, or an upright bass, I think they're called.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
You can call them either way. Yeah.
And then the guitarist, he was screaming into his pickups and like doing different things with his like strumming and pickup work. It was really different.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the first time that I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is like so different. Like it's way different than thrash metal. Nobody's coming with an upright bass in thrash metal.
I've seen the Melvins play with an upright bass, and I just love the energy that that brings. There was a local band here, even that was like a pagan metal band that had a cellist. I love that kind of experimentation. One of my favorite bands right now, they call themselves Doom Brass because they're a doom metal band. Their name is called 8 Foot Manchild, but they have tubas and saxes and it's freaking awesome. I felt for a long time that like the doom metal guys were kind of like the performance art of metal. Like they were the theater kids that grew up to like metal and were not afraid to experiment with
Yeah.
playing with genres and instruments and sax and doom is a thing now, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm all about it.
I just talked to Brody Utley from Rivers of Nile, and we discussed
Oh
like
yeah.
bringing sax into the mix. And I think Rivers of Nile like opened me up to jazz because
Mm.
my father was a record collector, and I grew up listening to like doo-wop and blues, and then I got into metal, like Sabbath. I think the blues just led right into it. And I skipped over jazz, and like lately, I've been really getting into a lot of jazz, and even some of the more like jazz fusion metal, or like some of like the Blood Incantation, or
Oh yeah.
that
That
free
new
form
blood
flowing.
yeah. Yeah, like the new Blood Incantation album is wild. It took me a couple listens to really sink my teeth into it. But yeah, I love that when people mix that stuff up. Jazz is kind of like a funny thing even within the band because like I personally can't stand listening to straight jazz,
Okay.
but our singer is all about jazz, and so we kind of pick on each other about it. And I've always had this analogy that jazz is like salt. You wouldn't want to just like eat a block of salt by itself, but you use it to season other things, and it makes it amazing.
But what did it for me was my neighbor he's a jerk. His name's Dr. Destruction on Instagram. He's such a jerk.
I know him. Yeah, I've talked to him. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome dude. But I hate him because he talked me into picking up all these guitars and got me into this expensive hobby. But
Yeah,
he introduced me to Alex Skolnick's uh jazz band. I don't know if you knew Alex Skolnick.
I don't.
He's from Testament. He's Testament's guitarist.
Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
And
Okay, yeah,
he is just amazing. And he has a two side project jazz band, the Alex Skolnick Trio, which
okay.
does jazz covers of metal songs. I think the album's called Goodbye to Romance, and it has like maybe like Mr. Crowley or something, but in like jazz form. It's different, but it was a nice transition piece for me.
I think there's a Lounge on Fire. They do like lounge music covers of popular metal songs.
I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah.
I'm all for different and taking chances
Yeah.
and risks.
Well, yeah, even it's not even taking chances at risk. It's like genres grow stale if you don't have people bringing in outside influences.
Yeah,
And I think that's like if you want to like keep your subculture alive, you got to be constantly mixing it up with people from the outside to keep it fresh and interesting. Because, we can always listen to those old albums over and over again. They're not never going away, but I also want to listen to new stuff that, you know, people allow people to be creative and yeah, bring in these influences. Even if it's like, yeah, maybe it's not for me, but someone will love it. And,
yeah.
I think we should encourage that.
I think like for me, the Blood Incantation album was not, I
Yeah.
did not like it at all.
Oh,
But
you didn't? Okay.
no, but I love the fact that they went out and they just did it, you know?
Yeah.
Like, while it didn't resonate with me because it's a lot more of like that Jefferson Starship, yes, progressive
Pink
sound.
Floyd. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like a little Pink Floyd, but I'm more of like a thrash and speed guy. And there
Right.
just wasn't enough of that for me. There's another album I listened to. I can't,
But there's an important thing here is like right now we're talking about it. And so even if you didn't like it, we're sitting here talking about it, and that's a win for them.
and if for you know, but nobody else knows, the reason I met Joe was we started discussing. I did not like Kendrick Lamar's halftime show. I thought it was terrible. But Joe didn't know at the time. I'm a big fan of Kendrick Lamar. I just didn't like the show.
Yeah, that was an article I wrote for Clean and Sober Stoner about not only specifically that halftime show, but experiencing art through cultural context and why, if you got a lot of these people, boomers, hating on the halftime show, but part of that is because, they're not part of that cultural context. They don't really understand how something like that came up. So, you know, that halftime show got me into listening to Kendrick Lamar more, partly because understanding that they got chosen for that show for a reason. So he must have some cultural impact somewhere. I want to go understand it.
Sure.
And, obviously things like the Super Bowl halftime show has, limitations in terms of what you can do. And, a lot of times I feel like they try to cram too much into a short time frame. But, if that's an invitation to go explore his discography and what in the culture made that important, then I think that's, even if you don't like the music, understanding that has a lot of value, I think, just being well-rounded as an artist.
I agree. And when you mentioned that in your, like when we were messaging about this and you said you like
Yeah.
how like art imitates life, it had me thinking today that often art, often life is just art. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you're just living, you know, and like by you making songs and just living your life, that's art. And I think when they intersect, like when my artistic interests intersect your artistic expression,
Yeah.
that's the greatest communication there can be because it's almost symbolic and not like it's not you directly importing material into me. It's just an understanding and an expression.
Yeah, and I think this gets into some really interesting things to talk about because, we talk about how we market our music. And really, marketing is just the language of how you connect the artist to their audience, right? If I wasn't talking about the music, you never would have been connected to it, and you could never be a fan. But at the same time, my music fits into some kind of cultural context that if I just, talk to people I work with, that are not connected to the metal community at all, and I show them my music, they don't they don't have that context to understand anything about it. It's obnoxious to them. But for people that have traveled down this path of culture together long enough, where we have these little signifiers and little things that we understand about riffs and tempo and tone that, you know, those are the people that are your potential audience. And, you got to, one of the big questions for an artist is how do you find those people and connect with them?
Yeah. And it's hard as a, I want to say like an art devourer, because that's all I do all day is listen to music.
Same, yeah.
But it's so often I'm like, I want to find a song with this idea, but it's hard for me. Like I have to like rack my brain to think of like what a band would be. And I think that what really resonated well with me this year, I discovered was Buzzard. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I'm not.
Oh man, Joe, I'm gonna send you this album as soon as we
Do
hang
it.
up.
Yeah.
They're doom folk music out of Massachusetts.
Yes. Folk is becoming a huge thing again too, which I love.
So I started reviewing music a couple months ago for this website out of France, and it's basically like up and coming bands, and they, send like, hey, can you add this to your playlist type thing. So that's where I met
Yeah.
Buzzard, and I started listening to his music. I described it as like if Neil Young fronted Pentagram, and it just sounds great. And like I know your political, like some of your political feelings and thoughts, it would lean in totally to that. It's just phenomenal. And I interviewed him, and he's a college professor, and like he was talking about it. This was a while ago, but some of his like students were being detained by ICE, and a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff going on. And we actually even had a plan. We were going to talk about our five favorite albums together, but we never even got to that. Um, just great
Yeah.
music. And that's the type of like art that's expression that also allows me to become more educated and maybe even grow a little bit, you know?
Heck yeah. Obviously politics are a big thing now. And, I've definitely seen in some metalheads they want to keep politics separate, but that to me seems almost like a tragic dereliction of duty as a citizen. Especially since metal and punk were such political means of communication when we were all younger. And, I'm really happy to hear you say that there's, this folk doom band that's taking on that mantle. Because I feel like other genres have taken up that mantle now more than metal has.
Yeah.
So, sometimes people come up to me and ask us like, well, where's punk rock in these trying times? And I'm telling them punk rock is in these trying times right now today is hip hop,
Yeah.
you know. So it's good to see that, there's some metal contribution to the current zeitgeist.
Yeah, I grew up in a mixed community, and one of my best friends growing up, his older brother went to a historical black college, and so like when he would come home on I guess like semester breaks or whatever, he would bring tape. That back then it was tapes. I was in like sixth
Yeah.
grade, so he would bring Southern rap up and like, but
Yeah.
back on tapes. So I got really into rap when I was like in hip hop and whatever R&B when I was younger. Like I love Janet Jackson, Prince. But I like some of the my favorite artists are still like Public Enemy and like NWA and
Yeah.
all those like those groups that back then like I was listening to punk and hip hop at the same time because of that aggressive release. And
Yeah.
it made it easy for me because back then, like in the black community, the black dude, my black friends would be like, "Hey man, you're listening to that racist white stuff," and then like the white dudes would be like, "Hey man, you're listening to racist black stuff." But like really, I listened to both of them, and I was like, "Man, they're the same thing, just a little bit different of a beat." And I feel like 100% with you. Like I feel like hip hop took that torch and ran with it.
Yeah.
Everybody else just kind of faded back.
Yeah, and I think a lot of metalheads are kind of wrapped up in the nostalgia of what they grew up with, not remembering the environment that generated that music. And so like Metallica's one. How do you get more political than that song? And
Yeah.
we just remember it, a lot of people just remember it as just this awesome song that created some feeling in them back then and have completely detached the inspiration that brought in that kind of really powerful music. And it's tragic. But we have people making that kind of music today. And it's pretty powerful. And it doesn't have to be metal, doesn't have to be doom, but it's still awesome. And the music of the people is the music for me, I guess is what it comes down to.
Yeah. And like to echo your sentiments, like you look back at the old blues artists who were, like this
Yeah,
the slave like this, the slave chants from out in the fields. I don't know if you're familiar with Zeal and Ardor.
I've heard of them. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, like so there's it's a I believe it started as one guy, Manuel, and I don't remember his last name. And he posted online like a challenge, like, "Hey man, take two genres, throw them together." And I think they took like death metal and like slave chants. And he took it. Somebody was throwing a dig at him because I believe this is the story because he's black. So he was
Hmm.
like, "All right, I'm gonna do it," and then he killed it, and he just put album after album of it out. And I
Oh,
really like the fact that he took an insult and something negative and made it into something so positive and
yeah.
beautiful and political. Very, very much political. His stuff too.
Yeah, and I'm loving seeing not only, the growth of folk music, but we're seeing a lot of native metal, Black Braid, obviously the Who is really popular, and we're seeing a lot of like not even just American native, but natives from around the world picking up this banner of metal and mixing their traditional music with this heaviness, and it all sounds so freaking cool.
I got sent a band. It was my first band from Madagascar today, and I was like,
I bet it was awesome.
yeah. I was like, it came up and it was like Madagascar metal, and I was like, what? I gotta try it. And it was exactly like I read the bio that they wrote, and they took like same thing, a lot of the negativity in Madagascar in that portion of Africa, and they wrote something positive about it. But they brought in a huge amount of traditional like influences and instruments, and I loved
Yeah.
it because it was so 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 different than everybody else. I'll send that to you too.
And the beauty of it is it's all authentic because no one's like fronting up a bunch of money to try and produce something like this. These people are impassioned to make this stuff, and you can't hide that. You can't. Yeah, and that to me is almost the most important thing is it's an authentic piece of themselves that they are blending and putting out into the world.
I agree. And I even like the fact that their lyric, like the one song they sent me was based off of I think child trafficking and like illegal organ harvesting.
Oh
And
my goodness.
so they were saying like it's a big problem, I guess, in like that region
Mhm.
of Africa. Like I didn't know organ harvesting was that big over there. But I think it's really cool that they're taking like a positive approach to like get the word out and,
Yeah.
call to action.
Yeah, and like music is such an effective communicator for those kinds of issues because, if you see a news article, you might pass it up, but if they got a sweet riff on it and
Yeah,
music that speaks to you in some way and then inspires you to dive deeper into the lyrics and then understand issues from their context, I mean, how better way to communicate than that?
that's what I'm saying. And
Yeah,
I try to do that as best I can, but like the frustration with music is like you never fully understand like what that artist thinks, even though you come
right.
close.
Well, and part of that is as a listener, you're mixing that with your own experiences in your own cultural context.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's probably things in the Madagascar metal lyrics that you may not put two and two together, but at the same time, they're writing things to their experience that they may not understand how you're going to put two and two together based on your own experience.
yeah,
And so, the lyrics mean something when they wrote it, but they also mean something when you listen to it.
yeah, yeah. So how did you get hooked up with clean and sober stoner?
So as I had friended, a lot of people in the industry that were writing reviews, partly because I wanted to connect with them to help with the promotion of my own music. But I do a fair amount of writing on my own, based on, whether it's politics or music or culture. And I wrote a write-up just for my personal Facebook about the role of AI in art. And Scott saw it and read it and really liked it and invited me to expound on it and start doing some of these writings for his website.
Yeah.
And yeah, so here we are.
He's a great dude, man. And I was
I
just,
thought, yeah.
yeah, and I think what he does is just amazing, not only for the scene, but for like individuals, struggling with addiction too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, can't get any more metal than that, I think. And it is really encouraging to me to see how people that are really committed to community, whether in their career or in their personal lives, also just tend to have really great taste in music.
Yeah. Uh, I can't say I like shitty music, right?
Right. But here you are, like passionate enough that you have this channel and you're bringing people on to talk about their music and you're talking about music every day, and as you said, you're a voracious consumer of art, but I also know in your personal life you also work to help your community, and I think it is difficult to have one without the other personally.
I agree. Because you're always trying to improve on both
Yeah.
art or life.
Yeah, and I think art makes you introspective, and being involved in your community makes you thoughtful, and yeah, though I think they both kind of open yourself up to each other.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I, yeah, I really like it, man. And
Me too.